The title, the correct title is The Black Box Revelation, what's new in neuromonitoring. And I think the aim of Manu was to review some new techniques in neuromonitoring focus on the brain. And I wanted to think about water in the brain, mainly water in the brain, not mass lesion and other things. And because, as you already heard this morning, 80% of the brain is water. And if you think, you already see something similar this morning, the flow across the blood-brain barriers, the law that this morning was passed through is the Starling law, but compared to the capillary in the peripheral blood, in peripheral vessel, there is the difference in hydrostatic pressure. Osmotic pressure brings water inside the capillary, but most important, salt doesn't cross freely the blood-brain barrier, so produce a pressure. And if you have a decrease in salt, in natremia, in the patient, you could have brain edema. Think about, this morning we discussed about albumin and sodium and solution infused in the brain. If you double, I say double, the level of the albumin, you will have less effect on the brain barrier compared to 1 milliequivalent of salt increase. So means that salt must move more water than albumin if the barrier is close. But we started to understand also that water is managed not only by driving force, pressure, oncotic pressure, but there are some channels, some proteins that has been discovered 10 years ago that regulate the flow of the water inside the brain. They are called aquaporin. And you will see in this slide the summary of what I think about this kind of family of proteins. Water is passed through the capillary with hydrostatic pressure, return back through the oncotic pressure. Sodium gives some effect on the flow, net flow on the blood-brain barrier, but the regulation of the flow, when the flow comes in the interstitial space, is mainly due to this kind of protein. And if you see animal with normally expressed protein and not normally expressed protein, the net effect, the water in the brain, is quite different, having the same insult, post-ischemic edema, so a closure of the carotid artery. We know from the book that we have different kind of increase of water, edema in the brain, vasogenic due to the opening of the blood-brain barrier, and cytotoxic, mainly due to energetic problems. The cell is not able to manage sodium across the barrier and across the cell border. So there is an increase of the, as you can see in this slide, of the water inside the cell, or there is an opening of the barrier. But the problem, if you are a smart clinician like Manu, and say, how can I monitor water in the brain and changes of water in the brain? The net effect of increasing volume is always an increase in pressure. When you overcome the mechanism of accepting fluid inside the skull. And the easiest way for looking at it is not a monitoring system, but is a way for having some hints of the situation and look at the CT scan. This is a brain edema in increasing water content inside the brain. And as you can see, the ventricle disappears. It's not a monitoring system. We are used to monitor the pressure inside the skull with an intracranial device, invasive device, ventriculostomy, or intracranial pressure device, intraparenchymal device. And the concept we tested before is the fact that if you don't have any imbalance in the volume, so your ICP is normal, you will have a mortality and disability linked to the first insult, the primary insult. But if you have an increase in volume, let's be gross and say edema, but also means mass lesion, means other contusion, means everything inside the skull, and you are able to reduce ICP, the patient have a worse outcome. Look at the death, double the probability of death. But if you are not able to reduce this effect, the probability of death is very high, 80 times higher than without ICP. So measuring the effect of changes in the brain and monitoring means also that you are testing the response of the therapy, give you some hint, and will help you saving more patients and treating this problem. In subarachnoid hemorrhage, we have a lot of information on trauma. I get only this slides on subarachnoid hemorrhage patient and say that patient with or without the white box global cerebral edema, ICP is quite different. And we try to be kinder with our patient. We try to be less invasive. And one of the ways we have now for measuring ICP, having an estimate of ICP, is measuring the optic nerve sheath diameter. Because when ICP goes up, this part, subarachnoid space, increase, and so the diameter goes up. Does it work? Putting together many studies, this is a meta-analysis published on intensive care 1 year ago, sensitivity and specificity of the test, looking this rock analysis curve, is quite good. But the answer the system could answer you is ICP is high, higher than 20, or slow or low, lower than 20. It's not a monitoring system, it's a snapshot. But you can use Doppler devices. This is a normal transcranial Doppler. This is a normal arterial line. And some physician and some physics people from Cambridge and MIT started to develop an algorithm in which they integrated the changes of the blood flow velocity and arterial pressure. And as you can see, this is an exciting field because we want to be less invasive. There is a very good relationship. In blue is the measured ICP, the pressure inside the skull. In red is the estimated pressure by the system. As you can see, the system is starting, because it's an evolving situation, it's starting to work very well. This is a blended outcome comparison for many patients, and the system is starting to be turned up, and probably in the future will be useful for monitoring the patient. But talking about only the changes in volume, intracranial pressure, ICP has a good sensitivity. When the volume goes up, say something, the pressure goes up. But it's not specific for water. And we can use some other monitoring system. For example, we are using currently in our unit brain tissue oxygen catheter. That means a small catheter put in the brain that look at the concentration of oxygen locally. But as you can imagine, the oxygen you can record inside the cortex depends upon the content of the oxygen in the blood and the diffusion. When the patient has edema, this is 0, this is 15%, you can see that increasing the distance between the capillary and the probe, the PTO2 goes down, as you can see also in this slide. The black box, oxygen tension in the tissue goes down when there is edema. But the other effect is when you monitor this local tension of oxygen in the brain, you try to optimize the oxygen tension in the brain. And so the net effect, looking at the balance, fluid balance, is that clinician gives more fluid for having a normal PTO2. But usually this produces hemodilution, and this produces brain edema, an increase of the distance between the capillary and the tissue, and the probe in this case. The sensitivity is medium because anemia and other conditions could interfere with oxygen tension. It is not specific. We can collect a lot of substances in the interstitium with microdialysis, and as you can see, if there is no global cerebral edema, or in black global cerebral edema, an indicator of ischemia, lactate pyruvate ratio, higher is ischemia, lower than 20 is no ischemia. As you can see, you will have an effect of water in the brain, and unfortunately, this is not specific because it's due to the reduction of flow. So how can we be more specific? And we can be more specific. If you look at some French colleagues, they studied the water content in the brain with a CT scan. There's only one group that did it in the world, and they published a couple of papers on it. We are not using clinically, but CT scan could give you some hints about the content of water. But magnetic resonance can give you more information. If you have a normal tissue and you have a vasogenic edema, water will be between the cells, and if you study the movement of the water will be very free, the water between the cells. If you have a cytotoxic edema, there is a swelling of the cells, and the movement of the water will be restricted, will be less. We are working with a connection in Europe studying magnetic resonance in many centers. As you can see, there are maps you can do in many areas, more than 20 areas, and you can take a look at, compared to the normal population, how water moves in different areas. And for the single patient, you can depict a situation of increase or decrease water. But it's not a monitoring system. It's a snapshot you can have once or twice during the clinical story of a patient inside the ICU. We started a couple of years ago to study flow in the brain with a probe that had a passive and an active thermistor, because the mechanism tested is that one of these two probes will be heated and the other will record the changes in temperature. And the rule is that the machine will keep the difference between the two probes of 2 degrees centigrade. Means that if this one is 38, this one is 36. If the patient has fever, this became 37 or 38, will be 30, 2 degrees higher. And as you can imagine, this is a boiling water, but it means flow. If you have an higher flow, the energy spent for keeping the difference between the two probes of 2 degrees will be higher. So higher flow, higher energy spent. But talking about water, this system will calculate also the thermal conductivity of the system, because it goes inside the equation for calculating the flow. And every hour we get a key value that means how much water there is inside the brain. Because this is actual water content, this is measure the key factor early presented. As much water we have inside the tissue, the higher is the key factor. And if you look at this slide, patient with no edema and patient with edema have a different water content, and they have a different key value. And you can monitor the key value because you get it every 35 minutes. And for example, this is a patient with a decrease in CPP, cerebral perfusion pressure, increase in ICP, a little bit decrease in oxygen tension, and this is the cerebral blood flow of the patient. As you can see, the cerebral blood flow didn't change so much. CPP went down, ICP went up very deeply because they went around 45 millimeters of mercury. As you can see, in this patient, they changed the water content. And most interesting, you can test the effect of the therapy. This is the osmotic therapy, a bolus of mannitol or hypertonic saline. As you can see, after the bolus, the water content in the tissue went down and the ICP went down. So it's not so easy to understand if there is much water, but we can start. This is only a first experience. We got in the last 2 or 3 years because the key value was available in the machine, but we didn't take care of it. We didn't think about the water in the tissue and how water is changing during time and responding to a therapy. So I think in the future, this kind of information could help us in selecting fluid. This morning we discussed about colloids, hypertonic saline, saline in brain injury patients. But if you are able to take a look at the effect of each of these therapies in your single patient, how water is increasing or decreasing, because you are trying to decrease the water content for reducing ICP, you can have some answer, but we are only at the early stage in doing that. Putting the information together, because I want to finish on time, I say that water in the brain is tightly controlled. And brain edema is one of our enemies because it's associated with high ICP and is linked to a worse outcome. Patients with a brain edema, mainly cytotoxic because it's an expression of energy failure, have a worse outcome. And we work, try to improve the perfusion, try to reduce the water content in the brain because high ICP is quite dangerous. We can have some information, by my standard monitoring system. ICP goes up, brain tissue PTO2 usually goes down if you don't change any other parameter, hemoglobin content, oxygen tension, and microdialysis give you some information about the energy crisis the patient is experiencing when ICP goes up. Some imaging techniques could help you in defining brain edema, but they are not monitoring system, and water content, this is the new information I'm giving you today, could be monitored also in the brain at the bedside continuously. Thank you very much indeed.